Welcome everyone to our Coaching Cafe today from wherever you're calling us from, wherever in the world, or if you are listening on your favorite streaming services. Today you have me, so I'm Paula Jones-Hunt, and I have the amazing Brigitte Calvert with me today.
Hello, everybody.
And if you have been following along, you are lucky enough to know that we've been deep diving into a recording that Brigitte did, a coaching recording, and deep diving into the ICF Core Competencies and as looking at it and saying how is this demonstrating the different competencies. And we've also been looking at that difference between an ACC recording and a PCC recording. And I have lots of questions for Brigitte on this one as we go along today. So as per normal, we acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we meet today and their continuing connection to the land, waters and communities of Australia and the lands from all around the world upon which you might be joining us. We pay our respects to them and their elders past, present and emerging, and elders from Indigenous communities from around the world. All right, so what we're going to have a look at today, we're still looking at the coaching demonstration and ICF competencies. We're particularly going to focus in on cultivates trust and safety and maintains presence. Where, as always, the Coaching Cafe is all about creating community. It's about that shared learning experience and having thought-provoking conversations. Now, this is an absolute joy to have Brigitte with us today, particularly as it's her coaching that we've been listening to. So if you have a question that you want to ask Brigitte, today is going to be the day to do that. So pop it into the chat and we will make sure that we get to that. If you haven't already, the audio transcript from that coaching session is available on our website. And I'm hoping that you've all had a chance to listen to it. I don't know about anybody else, but I actually printed out the transcript and started highlighting things and little notes that I really loved, that I hope that we get a chance to have a chat about today. So if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat box because we would love to get to them. And as always, at the end, we will have our ICF CCEs for you so that you can take a copy of that for your records. All right, so let's get started. Competency 4, which is cultivates trust and safety. So the definition for this is partners with the client to create a safe, supportive environment that allows the client to share freely, maintains a relationship of mutual respect and trust. So if we dive into how you go about doing that, and just for people who are listening and can't see the screen, I'll run through these. So seeks to understand the client within the context, which may include their identity, environment. I've actually got something in the way there that I can't see. Experience, values, and I think and beliefs.
Beliefs, yes, that's right.
Yes. Demonstrates respect for the client's identity, perception, style, and language, and adapts one's coaching to the client. Acknowledges and respects the client's unique talents, insights, and work in the coaching process. Shows support, empathy, and concern for the client. Acknowledges and supports the client's expression of feelings, perceptions, concerns, beliefs, and suggestions. And demonstrates openness and transparency as a way to display vulnerability and build trust with the client. Now, for people who have had a chance to go through the coaching demonstration, this one is relevant in a whole number of areas. And I'm going to pull out a couple of them, Brigitte, as well. So, for example, in that whole belief space, there was a couple of times when you really challenged what that belief was or where that belief came from. right at the beginning, what makes you think you should be working all the time was one of the questions, which is you've got a belief that you need to work all the time. What makes you think you should be working all the time?
Yes.
Brigitte, can you tell us a little bit more about why that's such an important question to ask at that point?
Yeah. I think when I hear the word should, it highlights for me that someone's created a set of rules for themselves around what they should or shouldn't be doing. And I wonder if it is coming from a place of this is what I want to do and I'm inspired to do, or if it's a matter of, that rule that keeps us confined to a particular pathway that perhaps isn't serving us. So when I hear that should, I become curious around what that might mean. So I wanted to chunk down and dive in a little bit deeper into, I'm curious to know potentially what you make that mean. And so asking what makes you think you should gives some insight into what do I believe about that? And so therefore highlights a potential belief that may be standing in the way of what's, standing in the way of the desired outcome, essentially.
I think the critical thing about this is if you think about someone coming and they're predetermined that they want to talk about exercise, it would be really easy to do a coaching, and at an ACC level, you could have started on the exercise and run with that. But I think that question in itself switches this from it's about the exercise to it's what's the belief, what's behind it, what's the underlining in there.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the areas that this moves it from a stock standard, this is a coaching conversation, and it would have been a beautiful coaching conversation too, to
Sure.
something that's more elevated, that really deepens the thinking in that space, with the benefit being that what you've done is really linked it to that person's beliefs and what's the truth for them.
And I think what also was a cue or a clue, if you like, for me as the coach listening to the client, it was around, there was language there around, for some reason, I'm not able to do the exercise. For some reason, I'm not able to. And so that tells me there's something standing in the way. There's something standing in the way of him doing something that would potentially seem straightforward. And so therefore that invites the coach, I think, to dive a little bit deeper into what's going on underneath the surface.
Because another way that you demonstrated this around the client's identity and perceptions was when you asked, how do you mean being validated? And so he said he talked about something about being validated, and your question was, how do you mean being validated?
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes, I suppose I'm looking for evidence in a way. So if being validated is something that's important for that person, what makes that so? What makes it so? What's the evidence that rises to the surface that makes that something that's important, I guess? So I'm really supporting or facilitating the client to get a magnifying glass out on the language that they're using and what they're communicating to me, rather than keeping it at that surface level. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that you did as you were going through, so I think in those you've demonstrated that respect for the person, the client, and their identity and their perceptions, and acknowledging as you're going through. But the other thing I really loved that was happening was that you were redefining what their goal was as you were going through, based on what they were talking about. So it's that idea that we don't fix the goal. It's not a fixed goal at the beginning until we've worked through what the goal truly is.
Yes, yes, I agree with that. You're sort of spending time on, what's really the coaching agreement here? So what are we really trying to achieve here? What's the underlying desire that is being presented as a surface? I want to do more exercise, or I want to, that's presenting as the surface challenge. And yet, I want to go in with that growth mindset, where I'm curious around facilitating that person's thinking for themselves as to what's actually going on around that. So I'm trying to support the client through them being able to express what they're feeling, their beliefs, their own perceptions, and the ideas around, oh, okay, that's interesting. I've just said that. What do I make that mean? Rather than just accepting the language that's offered, essentially. So I'm challenging the language that's offered so that the person can start to facilitate their own thought processes around, oh, curious, what does that mean? And so I'm staying out of that space and facilitating that for the client.
I think one of the keys in here when you actually listen to the recording too is the number of times that the client is silent. So you've asked a question and there's silence from the client, which means that the questions really hit somewhere for them that they have to think about. And I think that those silent moments are when you've hit a great question, because it forces them to think differently about it.
I agree with that. I think, we can tend to use the same neural pathways if we're looking at surface challenges or surface issues, and we sort of think about, oh yes, I know I could do this and I could do that, and think about some options that you might be able to do to attend to that immediate challenge. But being able to ask a question that has someone stop and sit in the silence and almost scramble, I think, for, oh, hang on, what do I make that question mean? Or how do I find my response to that? Allows those different neural pathways to be fired up, and therefore can stretch someone's thinking to respond in a way that perhaps they wouldn't otherwise.
I think one of the questions that I really loved that you did in that space was around what uncomfortable thoughts or feelings came up for you when you think about living that life, when you're doing the exercise and allowing yourself to do those things. Can you tell us more about what the impact was when you were having that coaching session, but also how that use of that question really made a difference?
Yeah. So if the client is giving themselves permission to, oh, I'd like to do this and I'd like to do that, and creating some sort of action around that, it's all well and good that we state that. So as clients or as coachees, we will state, this is what I want to do. And I'm curious to know that whilst you say that, what's happening for you in that moment as you say that? So I'm curious to know about the discomfort that potentially rises when you give yourself permission to move forward with something. And if there's something that rises for you in the discomfort, then that's something I think that needs to be challenged or captured for exploration, because you want to be able to attend to that and ensure that that's addressed, rather than just the surface, oh yeah, I'm going to go forward and do this, that, the other, if that makes sense. So I'm challenging the idea that there could still be something underneath the surface.
And is that something that is different between an ACC and a PCC level? Is that level of challenge that you might do around those beliefs?
I think so, yes. I do think that there's a difference. Whereas the ACC coach, whilst it's valid to acknowledge the action plans that a coachee moves forward to do, you would expect that as an ACC coach that your client has committed to taking particular action, and you're going to ask about any obstacles or barriers potentially in the way, or what resources or support you might need to make that happen, and when you're going to do it, nail to commitment. All of those things are really important. I think when you want to go deeper into that PCC level coaching, some of these questions, such as, what uncomfortable thoughts or feelings might come up for you when you give yourself permission to do something. It's just that extra layer, or removing that extra layer, or exposing that extra layer for the client to consider for themselves what might be in the way.
Yeah, which really links into that idea about respecting the client's identity and perceptions, and acknowledging the feelings, the concerns, the beliefs. It's really that digging that little bit deeper from that perspective.
Absolutely. Yes. It's certainly, I think, through asking those deeper questions, it does acknowledge and support the client to be able to express their feelings and perceptions and their beliefs that are going on for them. And it's almost like, sometimes I talk about being a fly on the wall, or sort of taking that step back and throwing a question out there for that person to start to consider for themselves, rather than just accepting the blanket response.
Yeah, I'd like to take a minute here. Does anyone have any questions for Brigitte at this point in regards to this particular core competency, which is let me just see if I can go back, which is cultivates trust and safety. Does anyone have any particular questions that they would like, or comments that they'd like in regards to this space?
One thing I will add while people are thinking too is that, part of that competency is for the coach to be able to respect the client's insights and the work that they're doing in that coaching process. So if you are able to respect the client's insights, and I think from memory, I asked a few times around what insights are you gaining, what are you learning? That's part of cultivating trust and safety, and believing that the client has all of the answers, and building that trust and safety around the coaching connection, the coaching conversation. And part of cultivating trust and safety is also, that showing empathy or concern for the client, or recognizing what they're saying and responding to what they're saying in the moment. So they're just a couple of extra things that I thought I might add to how do we know that we're cultivating that trust and safety piece? How are we demonstrating that in our coaching practice? It's beyond the environmental, creating a safe, supportive environment, but it's in that conversation and trusting the coachee has those answers.
Yeah, and I really like that question that you asked around what are you learning? So what have you learnt as we've been going through?
That's right. And it's more that potentially it might be at an ACC level, for example. It might be that you paraphrase or you summarize what the client is talking about all the time, and you might check in to see if that's what I heard was correct, as opposed to the simple question around, so what are you learning through this experience? Or what are you learning through this conversation? What insights are you gaining from where you started to where we are at the moment? So through that question, it's really allowing, again, the coachee to start sort of tapping into those neural pathways, rather than the coach offering all the, potentially summarising and paraphrasing and offering that information to the coachee, which is part of your active listening, of course. But yeah, it's also trusting the client and creating that space.
Okay, you said, please let us know the points we should pay attention to in regards to our body language.
I'm sorry, what was that, Paula?
So thinking about body language in the trust, in cultivating safety, what sort of body language do we need to pay attention to?
Sure. Look, I think we need to be mindful of the voice and the body. So in terms of, is it congruent? Are we seeing an alignment with what someone is saying and their tone of voice and their body language? And as a coach, being aware and observing that space can tell you a lot, and can, it gives you information to be able to then offer a question around what you're noticing or what you're observing, for the client to make that have that insight around the potential congruency or incongruency around body language and tone and what they're saying. I think. I'm just
Which,
noticing that, sorry.
yeah, I was going to say it sort of links in with what the question that Annie's raised, which is timing when to interrupt the flow of the coachee with your questioning. She indicates that sometimes she finds it challenging with timing when you need to interrupt their flow.
Yes, and I think that's a common challenge too, Annie. I think it's about finding that right moment, depending on what the coachee is saying. So, for us as coaches, we want to ensure that whatever the coachee is saying is actually aligned with the purpose for the conversation or the coaching agreement. What is it that that person wants out of the conversation? So, tapping into the idea of finding a space where you can interject a question around, I'm noticing that you're talking about this right now, and I'm wondering how this links to the goal that you're wanting to achieve or the outcome that you want. So bringing that back into the main focus of the conversation would be how I would do it. It's just finding that moment where it might be a breath or a pause or something where you want to serve that person in the best possible way. And that may very well be interjecting and bringing them back through asking a question. How does that link to the outcome that you're looking for? That's our job, is to do that rather than just letting a conversation go wild, essentially.
And Brett added, part of the trust and safety is building the framing of questions. So it sounds like, so I'm wondering. And so just to clarify, so it's very non-threatening and non-directive. And Brigitte, you do that a lot in here, where you say, so what I'm hearing is, which connects in and creates a space that says, this is what I'm hearing, or I'm wondering, or in actual fact, in the very beginning, you say, I'm curious.
Yes. It's really, again, it's remembering and embodying that growth mindset, if you like, taking on that fly on the wall, as I put it sometimes for myself. It's just looking in on what's happening and facilitating that person's thinking through asking a question rather than giving my opinion or potentially asking a leading question because I have an idea about what I think, and so therefore my question is going to lead them in that way. I'm going in with that curiosity that I trust that this person has the answer for themselves. I don't need to interject my leading question or my idea or thought around it. I'm simply curious, and I am genuinely wondering. You said this or you mentioned that, and I'm wondering how or who or what or when, to facilitate them to expand on their thinking and go beyond where they're at in that moment.
And Rachel said, in regards to sharing freely, that she had a client bring up in passing that she'd experienced domestic abuse recently. It was part of the conversation and was more context. But what would you say to such a comment?
And I think we need to understand our role as, and you might want to contribute to this too, Paula, given your experience with, the mental health first aid and what have you. But I think that as a coach, understanding our role and our responsibility as a coach and understanding where we need to refer as well, I think is probably the clearest answer I can give there, because we are not equipped and nor are we qualified to be having conversations around that type of experience for somebody. So therefore you wonder, how do you serve this person in the best possible way, and who is the person that can serve this person in regard to that matter better than I can, because as a coach, it's not my place or space to go into that conversation.
Yes, I think it's one of those hard ones where it definitely is important for that person. But yeah, it's around, that's probably not something I can assist you with. But I could absolutely make some recommendations for you, or it's even a question of who have you spoken to about this, or what have you done to work through this. Even so what have you done so far? So from a coaching perspective, we're still trying to understand where that person is at that particular point before we head into solutions mode, because I'm very good at heading there as fast as I can. But then it is, would you like some information about where you can get further help with that, because it falls outside of the remit for a coaching conversation.
Absolutely. And Rachel's also added there, and I think you're right too, Rachel, acknowledging what your client has said, and certainly moving into that referral. And I love Paula's questions around, what have you done so far and who have you spoken to try and support that person in facilitating a pathway forward for themselves. Yeah.
Okay, so as per normal, we are running out of time, which is what happens on a coaching cafe. But let's have a look at the next unit of competency, which is around maintains presence. So the definition here is fully conscious and present with the client, employing a style that is open, flexible, grounded, and confident. And if we look at what that looks like, remains focused, observant, empathetic, and responsive to the client, demonstrates curiosity during the coaching process, which we've talked a lot about, that curious piece, manages one's emotions to stay present with the client, demonstrates confidence in working with strong client emotions during the coaching process. And I guess when you start looking at beliefs and digging into perceptions, that's when that emotion bit really comes into it. Is comfortable working in a space of not knowing and creates or allows space for silence, pause, or reflection. And we've talked about the fact that you leave the silence and are waiting for the person. I guess the question I hear a lot from people is that maintaining presence. So how do you maintain presence throughout a coaching session that connects you in with that person?
And it really comes into the idea of that curiosity. So for me to maintain presence, I'm really listening to what the client is saying. I'm, asking questions in response to the whole person, not just what you need to do, but also who you need to be. I think is really important. I'm always focusing on what the client wants to achieve in that session. So the session's quite focused on a particular outcome rather than just, letting it run wild, as I said earlier. But also to partnering to allow them to choose where the conversation flows through asking questions such as, what are you learning? What insights are you gaining? Where to from here? This is where we started. This is where we're at. Where are we heading? So those sorts of open and curious questions mean that I am remaining present for that client's thinking processes and where they're going with that. So the curiosity piece, I hope that I've been able to demonstrate that in that coaching conversation in terms of being curious and open to hearing what that person says, but also comfortable in the space of not knowing. I don't know the answers for that person. So I genuinely go in there with curiosity because I don't know the answers. And I maintain that space of not knowing through asking those curious questions because I know that the person can find those answers for themselves.
And I think sometimes what can happen for particularly new coaches is what they're focused on is I've got to ask the questions. And so, and I think I need to do them in a particular order. So, and when you're first starting, that's perfectly reasonable because you do need to practice and make sure you've got your flow. But that maintaining presence as you're moving from that ACC to a PCC is less on the what's my next question to more on what am I hearing? So then I can ask the next question. And it's that listening piece, that really deep listening that moves the question and you get a better question.
And I think, yeah, absolutely, Paula, you're right. And I think the value, of course, in that ACC level coaching or when we're first learning, our coaching questions and models and tools and techniques, the importance of doing it that way when we first start is so that we really try on those questions and we know them and we experience them. And the more that we practice, the more progress we have when we call upon the questions we need in the moment because we know them. We've built our toolkit so much so that we can listen clearly without having to practice looking up and down or whatever it might be. If we're learning a coaching skill, we can call upon those questions and ask the right question in the right moment.
Amazing. Thank you, Brigitte. As always, listening to you dissect and think and let us know the workings of your brain is such a gift that you give to us. And he said time goes so quickly. I agree. We could keep going, but I understand that people need to get back to work and that they want their CCEUs. So I would like to thank everybody for joining us on the line today, and for if you're listening to it from wherever you are. And just so that you know, hang on, I've got to do all my bits. So we have a certificate for in workplace and business coaching. We've got diploma of organisational coaching. And there's lots of ways to connect in with us and be connecting in with the open door and expanding your learning. And we look forward to seeing everybody next week. So thank you, everybody.
Right, so we're going to put up the CCE, the certificate.
Correct. And thank you, Brigitte. It's been amazing. And if you hang on, I will be able to do the CCE certificate for you.
And an absolute pleasure. Thanks, everyone, for joining. And thank you, Paula, for your valuable questions.